Okay, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. My name is Ruth Shabani. I am the operations lead for Accenture's Innovation Hub here in Boston. In my role, I manage our funding as well as metrics, but also get to jump in on design sessions with our clients and manage client experience. So I think our speakers today, I'm really excited for because I know they use some of the same processes. I also sit in on the City Awake Advisory Board. For those of you that are new to City Awake, it is a Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce young professional platform. Through the monthly program, City Awake works to engage next generation leaders in dialogue around the most pressing issues facing our region. This year, we all face a number of changes and challenges. As a society, we've had to adapt to a more digital world, which, if you're like me, has really led to missing the feeling of connection and community. Today, we're lucky enough to hear from the co-founder of Soofa, as well as another Soofa leadership team member who are utilizing technology to build community and cities throughout our nation. I know I've interacted with Soofa signs in Atlanta and where I am in Brookline. And before we get started, I want to give a huge thank you to our sponsors, Barr Foundation, John Hancock, and P&G Gillette for making this conversation possible. I want to flag that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared on the Chamber's YouTube page in the coming weeks. Please utilize the chat and Q&A functions during today's conversations, and we'll be happy to share your questions throughout the conversation. And with that, I'm proud to welcome today's speakers, Lyra and Yuta. Welcome. I'll turn it over to you, Yuta, to introduce yourself and your role at Soofa.
Yes, hello, my name is Yuta Friedrichs. I'm one of the co-founders of Soofa, and I walked through all kind of different functions throughout our existence. So I started off with doing all the design, mechanical engineering, manufacturing, part of the engineering leadership, and now I'm sitting in operations.
Great, thank you, Yuta. And Lyra, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Lyra Schweitzer, and I'm the Director of City Growth at Soofa. So I work with municipalities across the U.S. to bring our technology to their cities and to make sure that we work with various community stakeholders, so local businesses, Chamber of Commerces, and neighborhood associations, to make sure that our technology is really benefiting their communities and also making sure that we gather product feedback from them.
Great. Thank you both for introducing yourselves. We'll jump right in. We've only got a short hour here to talk through Soofa and what you're working on and just our community right now. We're excited to have you both here. Could you tell us a little bit more about Soofa and why, in your opinion, it's imperative that we work hard to build community in this digital era? Yuta, we'll start with you and then we'll turn it over to you, Lyra.
Yes, Soofa has always been very community focused. That's the mission that we really started off with. And so when our first product was the bench, and the idea here was really that we create almost like a water fountain for the digital area where people come together in a physical space with their physical objects but connect the digital devices. And so physical space for everybody who works on the team, I think it's been really important, specific around the city experience. We are all very social creatures. We all very much believe in human connections, and that the physical space can really foster and create environment for that to happen in a different way that it does happen online.
Yeah, I agree. And to add to that, I think communication is so important, especially in the public realm, and especially more so than ever over the past few months. And we really want to provide a platform to cities where they feel like they can use our technology to reach constituents who might, for example, not be following them on social media, or as we're seeing, especially with schools going online, the extent of the digital divide, people who may not have access to information online because they don't have Wi-Fi or they don't have smartphone or computer devices. And so really making sure that all communications are accessible to everyone walking around in their neighborhood and their city.
So we're using technology, obviously, and we're using very advanced technology to display content. but at the same time, we are still making a physical object that is embedded in the neighborhood, and that is connecting, as Lyra was just describing, all the different stakeholders and putting them all visibly into one place, taking it off from the personal devices and actually making it a platform that is very community focused, and that is always like relevant to that particular community at all times.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I mentioned this before, but I've seen Soofa signs around, and myself have stopped and seen what's going on in my community in Brookline and where my family lives in Georgia. So I'd absolutely agree that it physically brings people together and then also connects folks that may not have access to some of this information at home. And I think kind of going off of that, Lyra, I'll start with you. This year, our communities have been fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. And with this continuous change, how has Soofa shifted, if at all? And has Soofa been impacted by kind of the reduction in travel and tourists?
Yeah, that's a good question. So definitely, I think like most small businesses and just businesses in general across the country, we were impacted by COVID-19. I think primarily just the disruption from business as usual. You know, we're a somewhat young startup, so we were kind of really getting our groove on like what works and our business model. And then obviously there came this huge disruption. But I do think actually the fact that we are still a smaller company really made it us flexible and able to innovate in response to the challenges that we were facing. So for example, in the past, as you mentioned, a lot of the advertisers that would pay to advertise on our screens were, you know, in the travel industry or were, you know, more events-based like restaurants or hospitality groups. And so, you know, we wanted to give them the flexibility, obviously, to pause their campaigns while they were so impacted and their businesses had to shut down. But at the same time, we still needed to generate advertising revenue. And so our team really quickly pivoted to finding new sectors that were still open and maybe needed to reach customers more so ever now than before. And especially with my role working more directly with cities, it was really amazing actually to see the shift because, you know, in the past when we talked to cities about the need for communicating with their constituents, it was always seen as like a nice to have and definitely a priority, but maybe not the top one. And over the past few months, I've seen that this has really become the top priority for cities, especially with information changing on a day-to-day basis almost, and they need a way to get out the latest guidelines and the latest information and resources out to all community members. And so that's been really amazing. And we actually completely shifted the layout of our screen to include a permanent box for cities to update their announcements so that whenever someone was walking by a Soofa sign, they would see that important communication from the city. And people have been, our city partners have been really using it to show, you know, where people can find grab and go meals, homeless shelters that are available for those communities who have lost housing. In general, just a lot of resources for local businesses to use and grants that they may not be aware for that they're eligible for. So that's sort of how we adapted our product a little bit. And right now I've really seen that our relationships with cities is actually stronger than ever.
That's amazing. I love that. And I love how relevant the content can be for the time. Maybe not the best way for us to learn that right now, but a wonderful learning nonetheless. That's awesome. Yuta, I know your background is in design, which led you around the world working on developing innovative products and services in places like the UK and China, and then here in the US. Coming from the innovation world myself, I'm interested to hear more about how your innovation and design lens has led you to help think through solutions to challenges that our communities are facing right now. And in other words, how has your innovative lens helped you to structure what Soofa brings to the community, both now and maybe in times outside of COVID?
Yeah. So first of all, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the original message or mission and how we all came together as co-founders. And so at the time when we founded Soofa, one of the hot terms out there, and that's the first term that quite frankly we raised on in terms of venture capital, was smart city. Everybody was gung-ho about smart city. They knew that all of a sudden we have all these devices that are talking and that are providing us with data, and they didn't fully understand what the capability of all of this was, but they knew that there was value in there, and there was a lot of investment going on. at the time. And so we went in and said, yes, we gonna want to crack the smart city code, and we want to start off. We want to provide physical infrastructure that creates a platform for a lot of that information, and but it's really tangible. Yeah, there was like smart city was such an abstract term at the time that nobody really understood, and we came in and we provided a tangible product that all of a sudden became more or less of a smart city icon. We were really struck by, when we went around conferences around the world, there was always, like right from the get-go, there was always sure somebody showed a Soofa bench at some point. That became sort of the manifestation of smart city. You have a piece that collects data, that funnels it through, and something else. Decisions are made on this data. So that's really how we came together, and we were looking for figuring out. We had sensors and we had the sensor input, and we really wanted to figure out how we now can output the data in a most valuable way. And that's how the scheme came about. So we are able to ingest data, and now we are able to communicate out and give some of this data, make use of the data, and play it back to the cities within the communities. So China has really been a great influence on how I think about innovation, and I think how I moved about life ever since. I lived there for 5 years, and it really was always trying to figure out what are the rules that you need to play by, which rules can you stretch, which rules can you break. And it was always really striking to me how fast you could move in China. I developed 70 products in 2.5 years, and that were introduced to the market. So that was just like a super quick feedback loop, and it was always like, let's prototype, let's iterate, let's change this, let's move on to the next thing, and a lot of improvisation. And yesterday we had like a founder group with one of our investor groups, and we were thrown into 2 different groups that had to advocate for moving fast and breaking things versus not doing that, being slow and not breaking things. So that's been really one of the mantras, I think, from Soofa from the get-go, is we wanted to move fast. That's one of the core advantages that we have as a startup, is being able to do that. And the reason why I think this is so valuable, it's like you try something, you may fail, you iterate, and that's really how I think we developed a product that is so successful right now with cities, because we really adapted very, very quickly to that change. And in terms of, that's just in terms of like product development and not being afraid. I mean, I was thrown onto factory grounds and not being able to understand the language, and just not having that barrier of being afraid and just like assuming that anything goes, because you don't know what goes and what doesn't go, and just see what happens. There's of course a certain awareness that we have developed over the time of like understanding the consequences. That's very important. So that's taken with a grain of salt. And there's something very interesting in terms of communities actually in China that I've learned. I lived in Shanghai, which is one of the biggest cities in the world, around 20 million people. And despite all the vastness and the high rises and all that's going on, they have these mini communities that are amazing. Like they know, everybody knows everybody's birthday, who they are dating, how they're doing in school, how the kids are doing in school, and all of that. They're governed to portion sort of very self-contained. They have like an elderly for these like mini communities. And so I think that's something very fascinating to think about, like how can you have an environment that at the same time is so progressive but also so to the core, and where some elements don't really change. And I think the elements that have not really changed, there's really like the human connection and the human interaction, that I think is so much of the core of everybody's existence, that it will not change. So I think understanding of how you can move fast and change things, and what are the core elements that are intrinsic to success is very important, and I've learned over there.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more that the human element, sometimes we don't think about it when we're developing and rapidly iterating and trying new things, but it's so important to kind of bring in that perspective and what your users actually want, which many of the times and oftentimes is that connection. I think some really wonderful learnings from China there. And so, Lyra, I kind of will piggyback off of this a little bit. When we're talking about human connection and we're talking about, kind of where we are right now in time, studies have shown that there is a growing rate of loneliness and depression among the young professional population. And much of our audience today will be young professionals from the greater Boston area. So how does Soofa play a role in reducing these rates among the younger population and using some of these tenets of human connection?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, as you've already heard in so many of our answers, that's such a core value for us. And I think now it is really more important than ever. With our product, we're really trying to get people a little bit out of the house, trying to reach people while they're on their walks and around their neighborhoods. And what's great about Soofa is that we're not just in the, commercial downtown areas. We really try to work with cities to do equitable installations, to be in all different type of neighborhoods, both residential and more commercial. And now we see that that's, more important than ever, because a lot of people are staying more within their house and neighborhood areas. And so they're still able to see what's happening in their neighborhood. And I think a lot of times people don't understand, or people don't know where to check for a consolidated source of information of what's happening locally, especially when events and other things seem to be closed. But there are still a lot of virtual things happening, and places where people can get together and meet people virtually. So we switched our events calendar, which used to show on our signs, to be sort of a virtual events calendar and show virtual events instead. And that's one way that we're still trying to connect people to what's happening in their neighborhoods. And I think, most importantly too, we allow anyone to post to the signs. It's a democratized platform. So a lot of community members, especially in the beginning, back in March, were just posting like inspirational quotes. And it was really heartwarming to me. I mean, we'd see people posting like inspirational things every day. We have people say, like, to all my fellow Bostonians, like, we can do this, we can get through this together, stay safe out there. And people were posting like quotes from like just really inspirational people. And that to me was the most heartwarming. Yeah. So anyone who saw it could see it and maybe get a smile and feel a bit more connected to their neighbors.
Yeah, on that note, we have a great product manager who's doing some great work on, you see the layout and behind us on what we call now the news, we call it the news layout, which has different blocks of information. And she's also the one who's creating like a poll question each day. So, that we had, what are the election going to look like in 2024 with new technology, or, what's your favorite holiday cocktail, or just fun interactive things that people actually get to, it takes them out of their zone and gets them thinking about something else. A lot of times she's a very witty and funny person, so a lot of these questions also make me laugh.
I love that. And it's very, then the next week you see the cocktail recipe maybe. So lots that you can do to connect your community members that way. That's amazing. And Lyra, you hit on this a little bit, but I'll ask you this. As Soofa continues to expand into different neighborhoods around our community, what are you doing as a company to ensure that all communities are represented and all people are represented? How are you determining where a Soofa bench or sign is placed?
Yeah, I'll answer the first part, and then I'll pass it over to Lara, because I think she also has a lot to say about this. So we have developed a tool in which we actually determine where a Soofa sign should be going. And the Soofa sign is made for pedestrians, right? That if sometimes we get put into the bracket of like a billboard, but that is not made for pedestrian. We are 100% focused on pedestrian people. So we are looking, our tool is looking at something that's like a walk score, transit information, levels of foot traffic throughout the day, and things that you can do in this area that we can sort of promote and help activate that space even more so. So that's really in a way that we are looking at sort of like on a micro level once we decided more or less a market to go into, and the fact that Soofa, we've really built a very sort of nimble product, in the sense that it only takes we sometimes say, have the slogan, it only takes 4 bolts. There are other company out there that are doing some similar things, sort of like an advertisement supported information system. And they always have to like dig up the ground, get all the permits, pull the fiber, pull electricity. Roughly the cost of an installed sign that needs to touch to the grid is about $80,000. So you can imagine if you need to spend $80,000 not on a device, just like to install a particular device, you're limited. You have to earn somehow that money back, and you're limited to where you can go and who you can serve in terms of communities. So the fact that we are just, it takes literally 20 to 30 minutes to install one Soofa sign with a drill. And it is that simple. And that allows us to really go into areas where other people simply can't go. And with that, I pass it over to Lyra to say.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, I thought you really covered most of the points. I do think the fact that just our costs of installing, creating the sign and operating it are so much lower because the signs are fully solar powered, means that we don't have to just go into those commercial downtown areas where, we think that advertisers are willing to pay more money to advertise on the signs. We actually work with cities, and we often come in saying, hey, this is like an important source of information. Thus, it's even more important that it's equitably distributed, both in higher and lower income neighborhoods. And so we usually even try to, with cities, like put one in every single district or every ward to just make sure it's an equitable installation. And another thing that was really important to figuring out this piece was to have co-investment from either the city or from a private sponsor that's really invested in the community and is able to, help fund some of our hardware costs up front so that we can go into all different types of neighborhood and not just rely on going to the downtown area. So in Boston, for example, Fidelity was our sponsor for the past year, and having them sponsor the signs really just allowed us to go into a variety of different Boston neighborhoods. So that was a great partnership.
Absolutely. And Lyra, I think Sandra, the other co-founder of Soofa, mentioned that this was one of your first times working with governments and municipalities, and it was new for you. So what are some of the challenges that you've seen, and kind of what did you learn from the team at Soofa in order to work with governments successfully?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I would say the number one thing I learned is that government processes can be slow, but I would say they're not as slow as people sometimes give the rap for. It's actually
that's great news.
Yes, no. I think, if you work with the right people or the right departments, they know how to be your number one champion and to push things forward. For me, the greatest learning and honestly inspirational aspect of this job that makes me love coming to work every day is just people who work in cities work there because they are so invested in their community and they're so invested in their cities, and they, usually have grown up there all their lives, multi-generation, like just are, have a vision for how the city is going to be in the next 50 years and wants to see it improve, and sees Soofa as part of that, improvement process, but also just as a way to bring technology to their community. And that's been my favorite part. It's, you're working with people who so truly believe in the kind of impact that they're making in their everyday job. And that's been really amazing for me. And I think it's a lot of times, and how you can, move along slower government processes is finding out what that city cares about in that moment. What's their priorities? They're a neighborhood initiative or another sort of wayfinding initiative where our signs can really fit in. And it's just about figuring out what do they care about and want to get done now, and how can our technology help them do that, and how can we make them see that. So that's been the biggest learning for me, but I really, really love working with city partners.
Yeah, on that note, actually, I mean, since Lyra joined, joined about a year ago, is that right?
Yeah, about a year ago, yeah.
So she's been absolutely amazing and a super important asset to the team and a great spirit, as you're already recognizing right now. And we also have a super strong and very, very agile software development team and product development team. And so we have been able to just respond so quickly to needs of the community. So, what our layout allows us, you're seeing this a little bit in the background, so it's not the glare, but we have different blocks, and we can program the screen with different blocks depending on the neighborhood. And we're actually currently working on a system where the blocks actually can interchange depending on relevance of the day. Like in the morning, maybe you want to see more of a news block. In the evening, maybe you want to see more of an events block of things that you can sign up for and so forth. So really, being able to almost like program the screen based on a location, very, very specific location and a time. That's something that we are able to do, and I mean, Lyra has a very great backing here, being able to go to the city and saying, okay, what do you need? Like, this is a product we're going to deploy for you, and we're able to put that together very, very quickly.
Right, and very customizable. I did read that I think almost all of your operations are managed in-house. Is that correct? And so I imagine that makes scaling and developing and thinking through new things much faster. We kind of jumping back a couple of questions. We do have a question from the folks watching. How do we get more visibility of Black and Brown people in public areas of the city to help create a better sense of belonging?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Definitely something that's been on our minds as a company a lot, always, but especially over the past few months. Our signs are in really diverse communities. I think especially in Atlanta, this is something that we really prioritize. So for example, and we have a lot of community partnerships, both with the city formally, but also with a lot of nonprofits and community organizations. And one thing we do when we're seeking out those relationships is we try to be really intentional about what kind of people will promote or give visibility on our signs. So in Atlanta, for example, we actually moved one of our signs from the downtown area to an area called English Avenue, because that neighborhood was really invested in getting our technology and saw it as a key way to connect community members. And it's a historically Black neighborhood. I think Martin Luther King even lived there for a few years. And we work with a community organization there called Beloved Community, and with Mother Moore. And we even made a formal commitment to be their partner for 2020. And what we do is every week we touch base with her. We put her notes from their meetings up on the signs. She can promote upcoming events. She's doing a lot of initiatives right now to revitalize the main street there. So we post all that information on our signs, and we help her get the word out about her work. And then I think in general, this question just goes back to, again, where our signs are and what communities we are reaching. So we really try to just make sure that our signs are equally distributed in a city and that they're in communities that are both diverse and maybe also less diverse.
Yeah, we also did a promoting small businesses of color, local businesses of color, for a month. I think it was a couple of months ago. That was also like super fascinating internally for us, because we were doing a lot of actually the lifting ourselves and just going in and researching, like, hey, what are the small Black businesses run by Black owners, or people of color in general. I have a favorite pastry store that's very close to my house, as in some of it where we also represented, and I found out that they're Black owned. So I thought that that was like so awesome to find that out and being able to shout that out to the community. So
Absolutely. It sounds like you can give a rave review. Big fan of pastries myself.
Patsy pie.
Great. Thank you. And I think similarly, we have another question here. Soofa is a great company. What other neighborhoods in Greater Boston or beyond does Soofa plan to add the Soofa signs or Soofa benches?
Yeah, so I'm happy to jump in here as well.
Yeah.
So we definitely want to go nationwide. I think we started intentionally at first with just two cities, Boston and Atlanta, to really refine our product, a lot of what Yuta was talking about. But now we're actually going to be launching in Miami. It should be this month. So that's really exciting. I think, especially given that our signs are solar powered, it makes a lot of sense to be down in some sunnier places. And I know Yuta and her operations team will be happy to not have to deal with Boston winters for another one of our fleet. And we have actually just hired someone who's based out in Nevada to really lead our entry into California. So we're having a lot of great conversations right now. And I think there's a few California cities that we're going to formally launch in next quarter in 2021. So that's where we're thinking right now. But if anyone has connections to cities or is in a city where they think a Soofa sign would be a great asset, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to work with you to make that happen.
Thank you, Lyra. And then a little bit related to your content and working with governments, with COVID-19 information constantly changing, have you noticed that more cities have been shifting their signs content to spread COVID-19 awareness and resources?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's almost the majority of what people are, or what our city partners are posting right now. It is COVID-19 resources, and we're trying to help them in a lot of ways to automate that process. So we are, for example, displaying their Twitter handle on the signs now that updates in real time so that when they're tweeting something, it's not just going out sort of into the internet, but also showing on our signs. And we're including the CDC's Twitter on there as well, so we can get information on that angle. And a lot of the content that's being posted recently as well is, maybe not necessarily COVID-19 specific, but part of the ramifications of it. So Somerville, for example, just this week, they posted amazing content about what to do if you're facing eviction and the resources that the city can provide you. And they posted it, I think, in 7 different languages. So that was fantastic as well, to make sure that all different community members can read it. And that's something we've really seen with the COVID communications, especially, is that it's being posted in so many different languages just to make sure that it's accessible to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And another question that's come up from the audience, you'd mentioned a little bit about working with community partners in Atlanta to update signs and spread information in the community. So I think going a little bit back to that, how is your community engagement process ensuring to include diverse voices of those who are often not centered in public design? Would love both of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, Yuta, I don't know if you want to go ahead or if you'd like me to jump.
I'm not quite sure how I should interpret public design. Are we talking from a city perspective of departments that are heard that are not?
I think the city perspective, and then I think also maybe just general kind of social perspective.
Okay. I mean, I'm having a little trouble of understanding the question correctly, but our sign and generally is a very democratic platform, and that's very easily accessible. You can access it to your through your computer and post content through anybody's computer, and post content, or you can just text to the sign via your cell phone to participate. So I think in general we always tried to create like a platform that's really, really accessible for all kind of members with all kind of abilities. I mean, at the very least, you do need a cell phone, but you don't even need a smartphone in order to be able to participate. And then just generally, what we do go through some public hearing process as well. That's something that Lyra can talk more about. So where we present to a local board and community, and people can literally just come.
Yeah.
And voice their opinion.
And I think also a little bit of how maybe you source some of your community partners and think about your community partners that way.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think Yuta hit the nail on the head. Definitely, we try to always get feedback from community as much as possible, whether that's actually just allowing them to post on the sign and to sort of play a role in terms of design of what information is the sign actually showing. And then proactively, I obviously do a lot of outreach to different community stakeholders, as I've already talked to. So a lot of times in cities that we work with, I will reach out to nonprofits that are, representing diverse communities to use the signs to promote their work and upcoming events and to get citizens engaged in their, their activities. And then in terms of that, I think it's about as well like a matter of who we're reaching out to offer technology. So this is, in a similar vein of not just being in the downtown areas, but for example, in Boston, I think a lot of companies would have been just in Boston and have thought, okay, we're in Boston, that's all that really we need to be present in this community. But we've actually reached out to Everett, we're in Revere, we're in Winthrop. We're really in like a large variety of very diverse communities, actually even more so than Boston. And so that's part of our process as well, to make sure that our technology serves everyone, because if communities in Everett and Revere and Winthrop are finding the signs useful, then we know that it's really engaging and appealing to a wide demographic of people.
Absolutely. And then another question we have from the audience is, have you partnered with developers and or community planners to help them think through their walkability score to see if more pedestrian friendly planning and changes can be instituted? I think this is a little bit of a spin on what you were sharing earlier.
There's actually one particularly, there are two particular use cases that come to mind. One, we are still partnering with the city of Charlotte, actually. It's more on the bench, but hopefully they'll also expand into with Soofa signs soon. But they are using actually they made changes in terms of urban design that they wanted to measure before and after with our data to see, it's like how pedestrians moving and how pedestrian levels changing. And something similar we've done with New York City Park relatively at the beginning, where they have invested in a bridge restoration and wanted to see how the flow of people changed based on change of sort of entries / another exit point to that park. So that's definitely something that we make the data available to our city partners and our developers. It's completely anonymized, but they can still see the counts and flow of people. So
Great, thank you. And then I think this is, Yuta, this one's for you. So most of our audience today, I mentioned this before, are young professionals. They work in Boston, in the Boston business community, and they're looking for ways to deepen their engagement. I think we can see from the questions that they're already very invested in what's happening in their communities and how the content is getting there. And just even beyond that, deepening their relationship with their communities. So as someone who has lived around the world, what advice do you have for those people who are looking to deepen their roots?
Yeah, I think being personal is, for me, it's always been the key to really create like a personal one-on-one connection with the people who you care about and who you want to care about you and what you are doing, right? So more extremely, I can, if I'm giving an example from manufacturing, which you if you think about it and you paint a picture, you're thinking about like a factory with steel and noise and smell and but very mechanical. But you don't think about like every decision that's made. Yes, there are a lot of machines and a lot of them are automated, but a lot of decisions that are made are still made by humans, right? And they can decide to help you or not to help you. You can be on top of their priority list or on the bottom of their priority list. And certain things are always out of your control. But what's not out of your control is what the relationship to these people is. So I've always created relationships with everybody from like a line worker up to the C-level people with companies that I work with very, very closely. And I know a lot about their families, if they have kids, how they're doing, if if they're healthy, what personal interests they have, and I always try to find like this one piece, even if somebody's very different from me, to connect with, and like truly have a topic to talk about and connect on. And I think that just goes a long way. This is something that you just can't fake. We are just so programmed to pick up on sort of like a genuine connection, and I think people are willing to go beyond just if you have that connection. And it doesn't mean, it's not exclusive at all of being professional. I think those, if balanced correctly, this can live very happily side by side. And on a government level too, right? You're not really thinking, you think government is very sort of rural and very rigid, and but in the end of the day, it's everybody who works in government, as Lyra mentioned earlier, right? They really care. They're people with their personal lives that care.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like kind of the takeaway for me from that is to start with my immediate community and the people that are already around me and people that I'm already seeing, and really invest some time in those relationships to deepen my sense. And Lyra, any thoughts from you on that? Just kind of deepening our roots within the communities that we live in?
Yeah, I mean, I think Yuta's really covered most of the points, but in addition to that, I would just say, at Soofa, we really like to get our hands dirty. So our product manager, who Yuta's already mentioned before, she oftentimes just goes out to the street where our signs are and just stops passersby and is like, hey, what do you like about this sign? Like, what do you not like? What do you want to see here? And we take that information very seriously, and we actually use that to inform and evolve our entire product. So I think about deepening our roots, it's all about, we really care about being local. So we like to go out and get into the communities where we are actually having our signs and actually get to know the neighborhoods. So for example, we're launching 2 new cities, and I'm doing a presentation tomorrow at our all hands, like giving a background on the city tomorrow, on both those cities tomorrow, like who lives there, what are the coolest restaurants, like what are the different neighborhoods, what's the feel of the place, because we want everyone to really feel connected to the communities that we're in.
And, even many, many months into COVID, I still talk on mute sometimes.
I was like, did my sound just go off?
But I think to build off of that a little bit, I saw also on your site that you do take a lot of consumer feedback and user feedback into consideration. Are there any new maybe products or developments or strategies that you might be able to share based on some of the feedback that you're getting?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I'm excited about and that I've been requesting for a while is, one thing our sign has is it has a sensor embedded within the sign that picks up on cell phone signals within a 25-foot radius of the sign. We sort of use that as a proxy for pedestrian data, and we give that back to the cities. And sort of the way we've been feeding that back at the moment has been every 3 months, we provide them a report with all the data, and we kind of create some graphs and custom insights for them that show, what are the busiest days of the week? What are the peak hours, especially in the past few months? Like, how is pedestrian activity recovered from levels from February or from this time last year? How are people's patterns shifting within a city? What's the traffic like in residential neighborhoods versus commercial, and how does that compare to, business as usual? So that has been a really interesting piece for me, and I think an important tool for cities as much as communicating on the signs. And so a lot of feedback I got from our city partners was that the data was great, but they kind of wish that they had access to it at all times, not just when I give it to them every 3 months, but that if they were working on a planning project or an economic development project and they want to be able to tell local businesses like, hey, these are the peak hours that people are out right now, that they could just go on, see our data, and then, do custom queries. So I've been working with the product team over the past few weeks to develop a database where basically any landowner will, on their account online, be able to have access to a data dashboard so they can select the dates they want, whether they want to see it hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, the exact signs they want to see, or if they want to see it on a neighborhood by neighborhood level, and then create custom charts and CSV files that they can download. And I think I'm so excited about this because I really think all our city partners are going to love this and having instant access to our data.
That's amazing. And I think I was reading about kind of the real-time feedback loop of data that the Soofa products
Yeah.
have. And so kind of using that to share with cities is incredible.
Yeah.
Awesome. And we have another question here from our audience. How does Soofa tailor content to multilingual communities? Does Soofa collect neighborhood data to share with advertisers related to that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So definitely, as I've mentioned already, we really encourage cities to post content in multiple languages, and we do this in a few different ways. And we actually just published a blog post on this, I think last week. So you can go to our blog if you want to sort of see the actual content that I'm talking about. But one thing we do is we provide two different options for cities to get that multilingual communications. The first is obviously on our digital screen. When cities upload content, we really encourage them to upload in multiple. So for example, the city of Boston put up that infographic of like how to wash your hands effectively, and they posted it in Spanish and Portuguese and Vietnamese and Arabic, like in French. I mean, they posted in so many languages, and that was fantastic. So that it's just rotating through those different content. And then, for example, when we launched in Revere back in May, we provided them with the option to use their vinyl. So sort of on the back of our sign, not the screen that you can see Utah sitting in front of, but the back is really space for the city to design their own wayfinding decal, we call it. And so they can put a neighborhood map on there, they can put information about the city. And we also offer cities, of course, to design that multilingually. So in Revere, they designed their sticker to talk about safe practices during COVID and how to practice social distancing effectively. And it's written both in Spanish and English. So that's sort of on that multilingual piece. And then in terms of data, we share the citywide data back to the city, and that's sort of owned or it's private to them. We don't share sort of like whole citywide data with advertisers, but we can give advertisers very interesting data, which is how many people have walked by in front of the screen right as their content was showing. And that's actually how we base the pricing of our advertising. So people don't just buy to advertise on their sign, they actually pay to have a certain number of people walk by the screen while the content is showing. And then that's how we determine how many times the content will show up. So for example, during COVID, when people were concerned, advertisers were concerned that less people were outside, we were able to say, well, if that's true, then we'll just pay your content more frequently, but you're still going to get that guaranteed hit number of impressions, it's called. So that's the data that we can share back to advertisers. And they also, again, have a real-time dashboard where they can log in, they see how many people have walked by the sign, how many hours it's played on the sign, how it's differing between different neighborhoods. So I think that's super fun for people to see.
That's amazing and very impactful, I think, for advertisers and folks that are looking to display their messages.
Definitely.
And related to the types of messaging on Soofa signs and Soofa benches, we've got a question from the audience. I've noticed that people are very eager to give back and help out to those in their neighborhoods during COVID. Is there a way Soofa is amplifying volunteer opportunities or ways to give back to the community?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, again, this is something we rely a little bit on our city partners, and we encourage them to post this kind of information about volunteer opportunities. That being said, we do have content making parties, they're called, once a month, where basically we get together as a team, and for an hour, we just create content for all our different neighborhoods. And we really try to tailor that locally. And one thing we do definitely look out for are these kind of volunteer opportunities or any kind of free event that's hosted, by the library or another nonprofit, and we post content about that to the sign. We do also have a local events calendar, as I've already mentioned, on the sign, and that just pulls information from various sources. So we can work, for example, with a nonprofit organization to have their events automatically upload and show on the sign.
Yeah, but I think this is a really great question. I'm going to steal that idea and make that the topic of the next content making party.
Yeah, that's really
great. December, local charities to support, right? Towards the end of the year as an act of giving back to the community.
That's a great idea.
I'll do that.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think I myself have been inclined to try to give back more and understand what's happening in my community a bit more. So I think seeing that as I'm walking by is even more impactful.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is great.
Yeah, we posted a bunch of content yesterday. I think it was Giving Tuesday about different
Yeah.
local nonprofits to support. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Um, and I see that our time is winding down here, so I'll ask a final question. This series started off as a Words of Wisdom dinner series. So we do like to ask a final question that reminds our audience to, think big picture, be optimistic about the future. In a few closing words, how do you recommend that our audience members stay optimistic about what the future holds during a time when everything kind of still feels so uncertain? And Yuta, we'll kick it off with you.
Yeah. For me, this has really been a time to reflect back on sort of the very basics. And I think for a lot of people that has been like people with families, been struggling with daycare, but at the same time, it's also been a time to really sort of connect much closer with their family and really be mindful of like who you spend time with, in some shape or form that was possible during this time, and what that interaction looked like. I think it has really been it's been challenging, I think, for multiple different people, for multiple different reasons. But I do have the feeling that I think it is a time of reflection. Perhaps we are a little too exhausted right now, or some people may be a little too exhausted to efficiently reflect, but I have a sense of the time that the time will come. I think this time has revealed a lot of problems as a society and a political system, health system, in many, many, many different ways. And I think awareness, being aware of that problems exist and where they root from, is the first step for improvement, for innovation, for the matter of of the topic of this today. So I think we once we come out of this, and we're seeing it written on the walls right now, right? I think this morning 2 vaccines were approved in Europe. So we are seeing the end of the tunnel. We need to keep that light sort of at sight and trust that we have learned a lot through the hardship in the last few months that are going to give us the tools and the basis to push to make great improvements in society and perhaps in our personal lives.
Absolutely. I've been reading a little bit about, I think it's something called the 3/4 conundrum or something like that, where you're kind of 3/4 of the way through and the end is like just hopefully in sight. So a little bit of that endurance here at the end. And Lyra, I'll turn it over to you. Any words of wisdom?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think as you just said, this has been such a challenging time, and definitely a lot of people going through extremely tough situations. That being said, especially having experience working at a young startup, a lot of times you see that really big obstacles and hardship actually lead to the best innovation that you wouldn't get maybe if things were very easy or just sort of going as normal. And that being challenged can in some circumstances really lead to better outcomes. So I really believe that since COVID-19, we've just adapted our product to really be even more community focused, because we see it's something that's a resource that's really needed by communities and cities right now. And we've made a few product changes that I think are just improving our signs so much. And I don't know if that would have happened if we didn't have this sort of pressure and external disruption that COVID-19 happened. And sort of on a more personal level, I think we all know people who have been laid off or lost their jobs, which is so incredibly tough. But almost everyone I know that has now ended up in a job that they love even more, or that they were so, almost grateful for this opportunity to rethink what they want to do in their lives and what kind of organizations they want to work for. So I would say, it's a really tough time, but trying to embrace uncertainty and hardship as an opportunity to really recalibrate a bit and innovate and maybe set yourself on a new path.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think that there's a little bit that we can all take away from that, where possible to embrace the challenges and see what we can make of them. So again, thank you both for so much of your incredible insight. Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today. I do want to thank our sponsors again, Barr Foundation, John Hancock, and P&G Gillette for making this conversation possible. We'd love to have everyone join us for more important discussions like this. Everyone can head to cityawake.org or follow City Awake on social media. And with that, happy holidays and see you in the new year.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.